Hey, everybody, and welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, it's Diana.
And it's Jackie. Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello. So you are listening to ABA Inside Track, which is a podcast where we discuss behavior analytic research on a given topic, and the topic that we have been given by ourselves is classroom management. Now, this is an important topic for all of you who work out in schools, but really is important to anyone who has to work with any group of individuals, usually younger children, because keeping your classroom in good working condition has a lot to do with whether or not the students in that room are doing what they're supposed to be doing, not getting up and running around the classroom, not hitting each other. So we thought learning is important. So we thought let's look at some research related to how to best manage a classroom. Now, for those of you who've listened to the show for a while, you'll remember that we did an episode on the good behavior game way back when, which is one way that you could look at improving classroom behavior. So one classroom management tool, but there are certainly a lot of others out there. So
that is episode 21.
It is episode 21. So way back in the day.
Check it out.
At this point. So today we'll be talking about two different strategies. One of them is an oldie, but a goodie, and one of them is a newie, and we don't know if it's a goodie, because it's too new yet, but we will see.
Sounds like cookies.
It's the newest.
It's fresh off
out the oven.
The press. So the first article we'll be talking about is The Timeout Ribbon, a non-exclusionary timeout procedure by Foxx and Shapiro, from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 1978.
Before I was born.
Yeah, before we were all born, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're not that old.
Thanks, Jackie.
You're welcome.
And then a more recent article, Preliminary Evidence on the Efficacy of Mindfulness, combined with Traditional Classroom Management Strategies by Kassan and Wilson, from Behavior Analysis in Practice, 2016.
I was born.
You were born. You had been born.
I had been born already.
You had been born. So, who here has had to manage a classroom? Raise your hand.
Me.
Just raise your hand. I don't want to hear any voices, just hands. I just want to see hands.
Oh yeah, sorry.
See, that's good classroom management. You know, I've been in a classroom. No, you can't see our raised hands. We've all been in charge of classrooms at various points. So, Dinah, you were about to say?
I was going to say, do my children count as a classroom? I'm outnumbered.
Then yes, they are a classroom. A classroom by definition.
Then my hand is silently raised.
Okay. Classroom management is never an easy task, and there are lots of great strategies to fall back on, but it is always good to brush up on these techniques because, man, is it easy to fall back on everyone's favorite classroom management technique, yelling at children and sending the bad ones away.
Do you want to hear my favorite one?
What's your favorite one?
Here it goes.
Oh, the clap?
Yeah.
They use that in one of these studies.
Yeah, they do use that in one of the studies.
It's surprisingly effective.
It's so effective. I did not know about the clap, surprisingly. I never had used it before. So I got invited to talk at an early intervention agency in the area. And so everyone was talking, and I was like, hello, I'd like to begin. Hello, and nobody could hear me.
Every time.
And then one of the boisterous ladies that I am friends with was like, ladies, because there were all ladies in the room, and she did the little clap thing, and everyone immediately did the clap back. It was like so phenomenal.
That's awesome because they're all used to running early intervention groups,
right? And it was like ding, 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 and everyone's
did they flick the lights?
Oh, they didn't even have to. All they needed, the salient cue was that hand clap.
Nice.
Everyone was quiet. Everyone immediately stopped what they were doing and hand clapped. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, it is a good one.
Yeah.
So why don't we get started with we're going to start with our oldie?
I think that makes sense.
Move into the present. Yeah. All right. So none of these are labeled yell at children and send bad ones to the principal's office. So you will know that those are probably not the best strategies. If you've reached that point, you have failed. Go back.
Do you know what they used as a strategy when I was a child?
Did they flick the lights on and off?
No.
Did they paddle kids?
Yeah. They sure did. I wasn't born in 1978, but it was close. And it was in the South. And they totally paddled kids.
Wow, I never got paddled in my high school, elementary school.
I didn't either.
Of course you didn't, but I was bad. I was mischievous. One time, do you know those little like plastic containers that they give you at lunch to hold like cheese and, like applesauce.
Oh, the small cups?
Yes.
The small cups, right? One time I got really mad at my friend because I had to be Liesl Turtle when we were playing Saved by the Bell. And I really wanted to be Kelly. And so I dumped my entire cheese bowl over her head.
Ooh.
Oh, that's not good.
In true Anne of Green Gables fashion.
Oh.
And then what I had to do was write a letter to her expressing my deep sorrow.
Wow. That's pretty special.
Yeah. That's what they did in my school.
Yeah, my 6th grade teacher was the paddler for the whole school.
What?
Yeah, she would get called out of our class to go paddle other kids.
Oh, wow.
And she had her own paddle. It's called Old Blue. She kept it on top of the filing cabinet. Yeah. And while I never personally got paddled, she would also assign punishments to the entire class based on one student's behavior.
Oh.
So if someone was being bad, she would give all of us sentences to write.
Oh, they did that to us once in a study hall. Kids were being loud, so everyone had to write sentences for the rest of study hall. And they came over and told me, like, I know you didn't do anything, Rob. You still have to write the sentences, though, which I both thought was really horrible, but I also appreciated their willingness to stick to their punishment.
That's funny. So
I hated it. I can tell you that right now.
All I can say,
Diana does not like punishments.
Yeah,
I didn't do anything wrong.
We're not going to talk about punishment as a classroom management technique.
No,
I guess so. I mean, it was pretty effective, I guess.
But
that's why we won't talk about them, because they're awesome. You should totally use them. They're very effective. No, because there are better ways to get the children to do what it is you think is best,
and to teach skills while you're doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
If all else fails, get the paddle. Wait, no, don't do that. How about use?
Yeah, I don't know that they can do that anymore.
Depends on the state, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anything's possible in today's political climate.
So anyway, that's my background.
Let's talk about something more positive, like the Timeout Ribbon, which I will be honest with you, I had actually suggested once in a meeting and was told that sounded like the meanest and most horrible thing that you could do to a child. So as much as I don't think that's the goal of this article, I kind of want to throw out that warning. I don't think you could actually use this in a school these days.
Well, I think we should talk about what they did, and then I think we should talk about how you might be able to modify that to make it fit today's climate. Okay. So first of all, I mean, I have read this article before, but in reading it this time, I maybe this time didn't skim over the detail of what the ribbon looked like. I always pictured it to be like one of those ribbons, like a
cancer support ribbon.
No, like a blue ribbon science fair ribbon.
Oh.
Like that went right on your shirt, but it wasn't like that at all. It was like a bolo tie ribbon.
Yeah.
Do you guys know what a bolo tie is?
Yes.
I don't, but that's okay.
It's like a cowboy tie. Like it goes around your neck, like around the collar of your shirt.
It's like a Girl Scout tie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like a neckerchief.
Yep.
Kind of tie. So it was like that, and everyone had a different color.
That sounds
It wasn't
fun.
what I pictured at all.
That sounds more fun than
It
the first
actually
place
made
prize.
it less fun for me, I'll be honest. But I don't know.
I, for some reason, had misread this article years ago as well and thought it was you got the ribbon placed on you.
No.
As opposed to what they did in
I think
in
that's
the
a
study.
common misconception,
Yeah.
to be honest.
I don't know why I thought that, too, because I was reading it. There's no
Well, it
mistake.
says timeout ribbon, so it does
Yeah.
sound like it's applied during timeout, but that was not what they did at all. They removed the ribbon during timeout. And they were looking at doing this type of procedure because they wanted to find an option that was non-exclusionary timeout, because they felt that could be punishing or misconstrued for students, and they thought that if behavior wasn't too severe, the children could remain in the classroom while just not receiving attention from the teachers in the class, not participating in the activities for a short period of time, and that should potentially function to get their behavior back on track.
So essentially, it is a punishment procedure, but only in the terms that we're looking to decrease problem behavior.
True. And what we don't know in this study, which is certainly a limitation, is the function of the behavior of the students in question. So typically, timeout would work as a function-based treatment if behavior is attention maintained, because you're removing attention, but we don't know if the behavior of these students was attention maintained, so we don't really know what to say about that. But they really were looking for something that was a little less intrusive than what some of the previous options had been, and that's why they were looking into using in-classroom timeout procedure, but they needed a way to signal that. So that was where the ribbon came into place. First, everyone would learn to wear the ribbon, and then the ribbon would be associated with reinforcement, which was edibles and praise. And then when they engaged in behaviors, which I'll discuss, the ribbon was removed for 3 minutes, attention was removed, and then it was represented after 3 minutes. And they measured whether challenging behavior decreased. So this study was conducted in what today we would consider to be a substantially separate classroom. It was in a cottage home, and the children went to school there. It was only 5 children in the class. And they had a really broad range of ages. Keep in mind, this was a long time ago, so it was 1978. So today, these students probably wouldn't be in class together. But there was Michael, who was age 8. All children had some range of fairly significant developmental delay. All were nonverbal. So Michael was age 8. He engaged in getting up out of seat, throwing items, hitting, and banging the table. Peter was age 18. He also engaged in out-of-seat behavior, crying, and some pretty, it seems, significant self-injurious behavior, which produced him wearing a helmet throughout his classroom time.
With an IQ of 12.
Yeah. So he was pretty profoundly impaired.
Right.
And was not really in the right classroom environment.
I'm guessing they didn't have another class for him to be in. Yeah. And then Chuck was age 9. He engaged in yelling, banging, and pinching. Calvin was 10. He engaged in yelling and out-of-seat behavior. And then David was 9. He occasionally engaged in yelling and out-of-seat behavior, but he was actually considered the appropriate model for the other kids, so they included him in order to be a model for everyone else. So the time that they were looking at was an hour and a half each day. It was sort of their classroom time, and they did several different activities during that time, including some gross motor activities, some tabletop activities like body part ID and matching and imitation, and self-help activities too. So there are a range of things included there. And as you can see from the behaviors that I mentioned, the students were often engaging in some acting out behaviors that were of concern. So what they did, it was an A-B-C-B-C design, in which A was a baseline. The teacher was instructed to run the class as usual. B was a reinforcement condition, in which the baseline level of reinforcement was increased from baseline. That's confusing.
Right.
Shouldn't have said it
so
that
they
way.
just increased reinforcement from the number of reinforcers delivered from baseline.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because in order for a timeout to work, it has to be removed from a reinforcing environment. So they wanted to make sure that this environment was really reinforcing. So they delivered an edible plus social praise every approximately 2.5 minutes to all the students in the class. And during the reinforcement phase, this is also, they were wearing the ribbon during this time. So they had spent some time teaching them how to wear the ribbon, making sure that was associated with reinforcement. And then the C phase was the timeout plus reinforcement phase. So here, the reinforcement continued on the same schedule that it was on, 2.5 minutes. However, in addition to that, when a target misbehavior occurred, the teacher would remove the ribbon and a 3-minute timeout would occur in which the students did not get attention from the teacher, the edible, or the praise, and they also did not participate in the classroom activities during that time. Any additional challenging behavior that occurred was ignored. And then after 3 minutes, as long as they were not engaging in additional behavior, they got the ribbon back. And then very shortly thereafter, they were reintroduced to the reinforcer, and they got access to that again. So there were additional observers in the classroom to help take data on this, and they took data using a 30-second partial interval time sample across the hour and a half. So it's a lot.
Yeah, so that's a lot of data. But remember, even partial interval tends to overestimate the behavior too. So they're really making sure that they're trying to capture the essence of the classroom, I think.
Yeah.
To capture all of the challenging behavior that's occurring.
But if it's occurring every 30 seconds, that's high.
Oh, that's a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So it could be really overestimating or not, because it could just be occurring at such high rates.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, even once during 30 seconds, to me, it's like, oh, man, we got to get this down.
That's true. It doesn't seem like a lot, but then one time remember we were doing that dog study when one of our grab bags, and we were like, the dog is barking 3 times every 30 seconds all day long. And then I just imagined what that was like. And
exactly.
I cried in my heart a little bit.
Yeah. And times 5 children.
Yeah.
In your classroom.
It's insane.
If someone's doing something every 30 seconds or everyone's doing something every 30 seconds, you're not getting anything done. Okay.
There's no quiet time there.
Definitely not.
No.
There's no reflective response time. And then they also did a follow-up the next school year, which was just 1 day of data point with the timeout plus reinforcement condition in place. So it was pretty simple.
Yeah.
Pretty simple setup there.
Did they talk about how they trained the teachers?
They said that the teachers didn't have background in behavior analysis.
Right.
But they were receptive to learning about it.
I bet they were receptive for anything at that present moment, right?
Yeah,
yeah, right.
When
it was the rock bottom of classroom management.
Right. Yeah. I think that it would be really nice as like a follow-up to do this, but also use behavioral skills training with a teacher.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
I don't think that existed.
I don't think it existed either, but...
Yeah, they said that she was a receptive learner. That's really all we know.
But it would be something, for future, if you wanted to take this and run with it, to make sure that there's good integrity, since they don't take procedural integrity data here, which I love.
No.
To run behavioral skills training with a teacher and then take some PI on if it's actually happening in the classroom, even at that follow-up, because we do know that there's some sort of drift that occurs over time.
Oh, definitely.
As classroom managers know.
Yeah. Plus, this was implemented with extra people in the classroom,
Right.
and they said that the extra people also would come by and make sure that the teacher was delivering social praise at the right time and could assist with the ribbon removal and everything, too. So not having those people present could be a potential confound later on for continued implementation.
Yeah, so it'd just be, I think this is a gold mine for like research potential.
Yeah. It was a long time ago.
Well, I think anything with timeout is not going to be seen as something that is...
We might be able to call it something else, though.
I guess you could. I
Right?
think the danger... Well, I don't want to get too much into timeout right now and some of the modern issues with concerning timeout. So why don't we move on to the procedure, or the next phase of the procedure?
I talked about the procedure.
Yeah, maybe the results.
It's like it's simple.
That would be the next phase of your procedure, your results.
Okay, so they chose the tiniest graph ever to try and show these results. I'm not sure why, but they do have the results for all the participants laid out here. For Peter and Michael, behavior in baseline was occurring at higher than 50% of intervals. For Chuck, Calvin, and David, behavior was lower, but it was still occurring in baseline. For Chuck and Calvin, it was around 20 or 25% of intervals, which is still relatively high. And then David, as you may remember, is our model student, so his behavior was around a mean of about 10% of the intervals.
Which is still a lot.
I mean, it's not nothing.
Yeah.
So
David can still engage in some behavior.
Yeah. With the implementation of the reinforcement condition only, we saw a decrease in behavior for Peter and somewhat for Calvin. David's behavior remained low. However, it was still above optimal levels for both of those participants. And then for Michael and Chuck, behavior continued at even higher levels than was seen in baseline with the introduction of additional reinforcers.
So when I look at these graphs, when I'm looking at Peter's graph in particular, I get a little like, oh no, because during the baseline condition, here that they were doing a time-based schedule and not a data analysis schedule on when to move from baseline to reinforcement, because in baseline for Peter, rates are already on a decreasing trend, and they continue on a decreasing trend when they move to reinforcement. So if it was Peter was the only participant in this study, we couldn't necessarily say anything right there because it's on that decreasing trend.
Yeah,
so
there's no change in level
right
from baseline to the first reinforcement condition.
Right. So which is okay because we have replication other places, but that's something that you can tell, like, oh, I bet they said, okay, we're going to run baseline for 5 days.
Yeah.
And then on the 6th day, we're going to do reinforcement condition.
Yeah. And Peter's behavior, too, is he's the participant with the SIB. So it's pretty severe behavior that we have no idea what the function of that behavior is. So I would definitely want to know more just than what we just have from this graph. But all that aside, moving on to using the timeout ribbon, we saw a decrease in behavior for all participants. Peter was somewhat variable, but behavior reduced to a mean of about 10% of intervals. Michael, we saw an immediate decrease in behavior with this procedure to, maybe 4% of intervals. For Chuck, behavior was pretty low and moderately variable, around 10% of intervals. Calvin, behavior was around 5% of intervals. And then David, behavior was truly at near zero intervals.
Right.
So it seemed really quite effective for all participants. For Peter, we also have a missing period of data where he was hospitalized with Shigella. What was that again, Rob? You looked it up.
It was, I think it was bacterial.
Bacterial
disease.
Bad. Yes. So
Poor Peter.
I know. So there's
We're researchers too, right? Yeah. You go in to run session, they're like, I'm sorry, Peter has some horrible disease and will not be gone. Will be gone for a long time.
Yeah, he was gone a really long time.
I'm never going to be done.
Yeah. So we don't really know.
Four other participants.
Yeah.
And then when he returned, maybe, a month later, his data were much lower than they were previously.
He was so weak from all his Shigella, he had no time for
it sounds like a
challenging
bad thing.
behavior.
So we just don't know what happened with him. But for the other 4 participants, they did a return to the reinforcement condition in which behavior showed an increase for all 4 participants up to pretty much baseline levels for all of them. Even David had a really high data point for 1 day. And then they ended their study with the treatment that appeared to be most effective, which was the timeout ribbon plus reinforcement. And they saw behavior return to those previously seen treatment levels in the timeout condition for everyone. Then summer happened. We don't know what happened during the summer. And we came back after the summer to the fall. The teacher in the classroom implemented this treatment for about 3 weeks, and then they did their follow-up probe, which I think is important to note. It wasn't, the first day of school they came back and did their follow-up probe. She had been running it. It had been in place. So following that, they did their 1 day of data collection, and behavior remained low.
Which is exciting.
For all participants at that follow-up point.
One of my favorite parts of this article is the informal observations that they include. I love that. During the first few days, timed out children, I like that they called it that, would try to remove other people's ribbons. Yes. Like, I'm here. I'm going to take your ribbon off as well so you can be here with me.
Yep. And then once he found out he couldn't do that, he just sat next to his desk and waited. I think that was Michael. I'm trying to...
Yeah, Michael. He began lying on the floor beside his chair during his timeout.
Yeah, so he just waited until his timeout was over, so he seemed to understand that reinforcement was not available during that time. Peter would engage in SIB and sometimes cry. Calvin just watched the other children. Chuck engaged in a lot of challenging behavior during timeout, in which he would attempt to open cabinets and lie on the table. So everyone really responded quite differently during those times. But all of the children in this study engaged in behavior that seemed relatively manageable.
Yeah.
During the time.
They could continue to ignore.
Right.
Yeah, because certainly you could get into a situation where you cannot ignore the behavior, and it could very quickly escalate into something that needs to be intervened on.
Mm-hmm.
But informally, it does sound like they are engaging in responses that are correlated with punishment procedures, right? So there seems to be some emotional responding. They're stealing other kids' ribbons. Yeah. There's an increase in intensity initially. But
that could be related to extinction,
right?
As
that's
well.
True. Mm-hmm. So, but it's just interesting to when you listen to like the informal part.
Yeah.
You're like, oh look, here's all of the indirect effects of using breaking this response reinforcer relation.
Yeah.
Theoretically, since we don't know.
I know exactly.
Could be both.
If that's your
happening
real
to
name.
Different kids.
Right.
They also, and you might like this, Jackie, I know it's not procedural integrity, but they did include a social validity component.
I do love that.
Back in 78 too.
I know. Well, they were more in tune with this stuff back then. We got away from it for a long time. So they did a survey where they asked 40 different individuals who worked with individuals with disabilities, who were special education teachers, principals, staff trainers, people on a human rights committee, program directors, and doctoral level behavior modifiers. I know. You don't hear that term too much anymore. And they asked all of them, how did they feel about this procedure? Would they use it in their own classroom? Was it practical? Would it be as effective as using an exclusionary timeout procedure? Do you think that you'd be allowed to use this if you couldn't use an exclusionary timeout procedure? Would you be able to explain it to parents, etc.? And overall, most responders said yes, they would like to use it. Yes or maybe they would like to use it in their classroom. They were pretty much split on whether they thought that it would be useful, but more of them said that it would be useful than not. Would it be as effective? 90% of them said that they would prefer to use it, and if it would be effective, that they would prefer that method. Do they think that they would be allowed to use it if they couldn't use an exclusionary procedure? 95% of them said yes. Do they think that they could explain it to family members and parents? And would they prefer to explain it than explaining an exclusionary timeout procedure? 84% said yes on that. So this was a kind of a nice early social validity of the assessment, which was cool to see included. And overall, they found that it would be, at least compared to a more restrictive exclusionary timeout procedure, more effective.
Right.
Or more preferred.
I think looking at, other than the one participant who had started to show a decrease in rates of behavior before they even left baseline, I think the big limitation is one that is not so much in this article as it is the fact that it's an artifact from 1978. I know depending on what state you're in, a lot of states are really looking into timeout. That is a very charged word, and there's a lot more legislation around how timeout can be used. I know here in Massachusetts, right, timeout can be used only for the purpose of calming, which I have a problem with because that's not exactly why you would use timeout. You would use timeout specifically as part of a function-based treatment in which you are removing the reinforcement of attention, which I wouldn't really associate as, I'm calming them by taking away their primary source of reinforcement for these behaviors.
Right.
So that always bugs me. So technically, if I use it and I say, we're doing timeout because we need to remove them from the reinforcement of attention, I'm breaking the law by doing that, at least according to the letter of the law, because I'm not doing it for calming purposes. Yeah. So that always bothers the hell out of me.
Yeah, and essentially you are, though, in a sense, right? So if you're going to talk about it
calming is a stupid word that doesn't mean anything anyway.
In a wiggly sort of way.
I guess. Actually, my hope is over time.
Over time you'll calm the
student. But what are you going to do if you remove a child from reinforcement for the first time? Is it going to calm them?
Absolutely not.
It's going to do exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Eventually they will calm down. So it's sort of the equivalent of when people go on all sorts of medications and then you take them off the medications and they do worse for a while. And it's see, they need these medications. Actually, their brain chemistry has changed significantly since you started them on the medications. Yeah. So it's I don't know. So I think a lot of people, when they hear timeout, are very scared. Thank you.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Thank you. I try. So I don't know how much play this would get if you said we're going to use timeout, especially if they were going to wear ribbons to denote time in versus timeout. I think there are teachers that use similar treatments like this. They'll have, marks on the desk, or they'll have little cups on the desk, or some sort of signal that the children are doing the right thing, or they'll have a board and it's green, yellow, red, and some of the kids are on green and some are on yellow and some are on red.
I've seen that before, and that seems like a modification of this in a sense, right? So wherever you are on the chart will signify what access to reinforcers you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen it go really well, and I've seen it go really horribly. And usually, if it's going really horribly, the reinforcer is very far in the distance, right? So it's in 4 weeks, we can have one piece of half of a slice of pizza.
And sometimes that'll keep kids going for a while.
But not 4 weeks.
4 weeks is kind of a long time.
For half a piece of pizza?
Yeah. So I think, if you're applying this to inclusion classroom or general education classroom, then you have a lot more option as far as how abstract you can be with demonstrating whether individuals are in or out of reinforcement, right? And also how far in advance you can contract for the reinforcers. When you have both of those available to you, that you have individuals who understand abstract, oh, this little token represents you, and now you're in the red section, or now you're in the green section.
Right.
And yeah, if everyone stays in green, then we can have a pizza party on Friday. Like, if you can have both of those pieces in place with that type of verbal language, then you have a lot more to work with, and you can certainly build this in to meet acceptability standards for today's classrooms.
If you have potent enough reinforcers.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Right.
But kids love all kinds of stuff.
That's true. Well, one of the things when we were looking at articles for this episode is I found another old one talking about teaching new teachers to use classroom management. And one of the main ways they were teaching the new teachers was how to increase the rate of positive praise statements. And I think that's a step we often forget, regardless of whether you're using timeout as a procedure. I think whether it's because the teachers are new or they have a particularly tough class and they are burnt out, it is really, really easy to lose that I'm praising 10-to-1 kind of ratio that we really want teachers to follow, or any professional to follow.
Right.
It is really easy to focus.
What's the 10-to-1?
You want to have 10 statements? You want to yell at kids 10 times, and then one time you want to say something nice. No, it's the other way around, of course.
I don't know if it was like 10 students to one student, 10 minutes to 1 minute.
You only praise 10 students, and then you leave one. Always chide that student as an example to the rest of them.
Single student.
Prison rules. You're gonna
Kids love it. They love that.
No, 10 praise statements to one non-praise statement. You don't want to give them the shit sandwich of, I love how you're working really well, but you're being very badly behaved, and I'm calling your mother, but keep trying. 10-to-1 or 8-to-1. There's a ratio there somewhere. I think 10-to-1 sounds good, though.
I like 8-to-1 because that equals 9.
Just because you like 9?
Because it's just like a random, like...
Is that your favorite number?
No, but it kind of is. But if you think about...
I like 10-to-5 because that equals 15, and I like that number.
Is that your favorite number?
No.
I don't really have
I just like 15.
Number. My favorite number is 12.
Yeah, I don't have a favorite
All right, so 10-to-2 is the ratio Diana wants to use. Pick a ratio, but just make sure it's really, really high on the praise to non-praise statements.
So I just saw a lady, and she put 5 hair ties on her right arm, and this was for her own, trying not to yell at her children. Every time she yelled at her child, she took one of the bracelets off or said something harsh and put it on her left hand. And then in order to move the bracelet back to her right hand, she had to say it was either 5 or 10 nice things in order to move it back.
That's nice.
So that's using the same ratio that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I like that, except that I would forget which hand is the good and which hand is the bad. So I'd be like, I don't know, because I don't know my left from my right.
It can be tricky.
I think it's a nice idea, though. It's like a nice visual reminder.
Maybe I'd have to put like a big like happy face tattoo on one arm and a sad face tattoo on the other.
Paint one hand's nails.
Yeah. I could be so Vidal Sassoon.
So in any case, regardless of whether you then end up using timeout, you should start by having a classroom in which your presence being in the classroom is actually found to be reinforcing, or else nothing's going to work.
That's a great point.
You may find, in this case, they did not find a lowering of the rates of behavior just through reinforcement. I think they talked about it being for some did, but some of the kids were already at pretty low rates. I think they mentioned something that perhaps they were getting lots of attention, positive attention, but they were also engaging in their challenging behavior, so it may have reinforced the behavior. Something along those lines is a possible reason for that. So start there. But again, if you have a larger classroom, you may have a lot of kids who just have rates of disruptive behavior, small, not very serious behaviors drop off when they're in this nice reinforcing environment. And then for everybody else, could you use a visual? Would it be the timeout ribbon? I think we talked about that probably not being what we'd use. We try to use something on the board, something everyone can see.
Because if it's something you have to wear, then you have to go over to that child and somehow remove it. Mm-hmm. That seems like it could be problematic.
Those bolos, I was surprised nobody got choked by those things coming off. Right? That seems really easy.
I don't know that. I don't know if they had the slide part, or was it just like a tied in a bow?
A loose bolo.
Yeah. I don't know.
So yank it. Let me try to yank that, snip that right off your head while you try to run away from me.
Hipster bolo.
That seems really hard. You're like, okay, now I take your ribbon off, which is your signal for reinforcement.
And if it was effective,
right?
If that was an effective discriminative stimulus, there should be an extremely high amount of emotional responding in corollary behaviors.
Mm-hmm. They said there wasn't, and it was really easy to take it off.
But I can imagine.
So, but with a different child, different student, that might not be the case.
I imagine one of your children. I'm just thinking of one of your kids. And if you were like, I'm going to take this away for you, which signals now the unavailability of reinforcers. I've sat here and witnessed this at one point in a different setting, but yeah, I can't even imagine. Like, pretty sure they're
Well, the other piece,
craziness would ensue.
The other piece is that the kids lying on the floor and crying, and it was all within tolerable limits. Right. But this was a classroom in which they had 9, 10, and 18-year-olds, so I'm guessing that anything was within tolerable limits for this teacher at that point. If you had a classroom of 22, 24 kids, and one of them, when they went to red on their visual, or hey, you took off their bolo, started wandering around and opening and slamming doors, that might not be seen as acceptable.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
And it would, and all it takes is one, hey, stop doing that, for the treatment to just be out the window. Because, now you're signaling the loss of my bolo means I'll get more attention than everybody.
Yeah, and that could very well be the case, although we don't necessarily see it in the graph, but it could have very well been the case in the reinforcement condition. Mm-hmm. And we didn't see decreased rates because they don't specifically state when reinforcement was provided. So it could have been adventitiously reinforcing problem
definitely.
behavior.
Yeah, I think that was their thought. This might have what might have happened.
Yeah.
What would we call this? If you said, I want to implement this as close as possible to the original research, but if I call it timeout, I'm going to get the state breathing down my neck. What would we call this instead?
I might call it the happy ribbon. So I would call it the happy ribbon. It would be yellow.
Okay.
And everyone would wear it as like an armband.
A bracelet?
No. An armband.
Like a cool sweatband?
Yeah.
Like a slap bracelet?
Yeah. Oh, like.
I'm going to use a slap bracelet.
Okay, I want to use a sweatband. That's what I imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Like
those
a
are
very
good.
yellow sweatband.
Okay.
And you can decorate it however you want. With like buttons, stickers, bedazzle it.
Okay.
So this is like the fun part. So everyone's like, cool, look at my sweatband. And I don't know if I would necessarily take it off, but I might cover it up. Like everyone could have their like sleeves up. And then I'd be like, Timmy, sleeve down, please.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm. Right?
That's relatively easy.
Yeah. And so if it's if it's a typically developing kid, they'd be like, "Oh man," and then their sleeve would be down.
But Jackie, what about the psyche of that young man, young Timmy, who's now been singled out in the classroom?
That is true, but natural contingencies, Rob. Papa, you're going to be singled out in your job by getting fired if you.
I try that one. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I know.
No, I'd rather yell at them in front of everybody.
Right?
That's very different. Because it not only does it single them out, but it's also ineffective.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. You could do that. I'm just thinking. It also might be nicer to have like a little like green red card on your desk, so it's more intuitive. So you could just walk by and flip the card over.
I have a kid that hide those cards.
Right? Have you make like illegal cards at home. That's how you know it's effective, right? Little Bobby comes in with like 15 green cards. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, could we just talk about it as differential reinforcement? Of alternative behavior.
We could talk about that, and you could talk about that as conceptually systematic. But when you're talking about it in like an IEP meeting or like to your principal, they're probably going to shut down. Remember we talked about this in one of our other episodes, where how to talk to the jargon. Like you just jargoned up the place right there. It's like jargon hanging from the ceiling.
Well, okay.
A signal
maybe that's not
that
how
they
I would
are
describe
following
it to
the
someone
rules.
else.
Right? That's why I said happy ribbon.
Yeah. Okay. I was just trying to highlight that that's really what we're doing here.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to call it that.
No, I wouldn't call it that. But like we're going to give a lot of extra positive attention for when kids are being on task and behaving the way that we want them to.
Okay. So we're signaling that they're following the classroom expectations.
Yeah. Like I said, I think you have a lot more options available to you if you have students who can understand that their little picture on the board is whether they're on green or not.
Yeah.
That opens up a whole other realm that I think is more acceptable.
You know, it would be really funny, and I would not recommend doing this because I think it would be horribly stigmatizing. But I was thinking about like the happy ribbons. I was thinking about you have like a little at the front of the room. You have like a map of the classroom, and you have like a little desk chart, and every little desk has a kid's face on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And then when they're bad, you like slap an unhappy face on the desk, and it's like, oh, now you get this unhappy face, or like a little like no sign.
Yeah.
And you just put it over their face. I just think that would be funny. You probably couldn't do that though.
That reminds me of in School of Rock with Jack Black. When
Yeah.
Jack Black pretends to be a substitute, and he comes into the school, and they have a chart where they have the stars, and he goes, "What is this?" And you get the stars being good, you get the black marks for demerits. She tears the whole thing up in rage.
I just think that would be so funny.
You can have recess every day. I think
That's awesome.
He's not having any of that.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we've got another article to go over, so I'm going to take both of your bolos, hand them over. I'm taking these both now.
Man.
Sorry, everybody.
How am I ever going to be fashionable in the southeast?
No.
West.
Sorry. Nope.
Southwest.
Nope.
You're
Taking
just
your
gonna have
bolos.
to wear your turquoise jewelry, Jackie.
I'm taking them away. Give them over. And while you're in timeout, why don't the rest of us take a break? We'll be right back.
Hey, ABA Inside Trackers. Are you interested in being a behavior analyst and you're not yet? If so, I really would recommend looking into the Regis College Masters in Science and Applied Behavior Analysis program. Our 2016 pass rates for first-time test takers of the BCBA exam was 90%. We think this is a true testament to our program. In addition, we're going to be starting an on-campus autism center in the summer of 2017. This is going to allow our graduate students on-hands learning right at our college, and you will receive partial tuition remission if you work at the center, which is pretty amazing. We also offer paid clinical placements and graduate assistantships starting in our students' first year, where all of our grad students are working in the field either part-time or full-time. I find you that job. That is part of my job. We also are approved by the BACB to provide intensive practicum, so students will complete 750 hours of an intensive practicum across their time at Regis. All of our faculty are PhD-level BCBAs with strong applied and research backgrounds in ABA, and all have published papers in respected peer-reviewed journals. We ensure small class sizes so that all students receive personalized attention from their professors, and advisors are easily accessible to meet with students. Two more really great things that I want to highlight about the Regis program is that we host an invited lecture series at Regis each year, which involves inviting outside experts in ABA to speak on specialized topics relating to practicing ABA. Last summer, we completed an international service trip to Iceland. This trip enabled students to learn more about providing culturally competent care to diverse populations. Students and alums work with children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder and provided parent and teacher trainings for 11 days. This service trip occurs every other year, and the next trip will be in the summer of 2018. And finally, we have a great location. We're just 12 miles from the center of Boston. We currently have rolling admission. We're accepting students until we reach capacity for the fall of 2017. Please check us out at www.regiscollege.edu.
And we're back.
What's our code word?
What? What's our code word?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean if you were interested in getting continuing education credits for listening to our episode and applying on the ABA Inside Track website or in the link in Apple Podcasts
It's like
for
we
this
had
episode?
planned that.
Well, you'd want to know what that code word is. You're going to have two of them. Why don't I give everyone the first one right now? And it is good. G-O-O-D. Good. Why is it good? Well, I'm staring at something that says good. So that's the code word I thought of. They're really not that well thought out, folks. Sometimes
like
they're
it.
thematic.
I like that too.
All right.
I think you were staring at me and I look good.
Good.
Dad joke. I just feel like that was a dad joke even though it wasn't.
No, you're not a dad, so by definition, not a joke. That is a dad joke. Good. Anyway. Let's move on. I don't know. Sorry, I wasn't ready for that segue.
Sorry.
I thought we were going to talk about our next article on mindfulness. I wasn't thinking code words.
You were being mindful.
I was being mindfulness. I was mindful eating.
You were in the moment.
Anywho, let's talk a little bit about another classroom management strategy, one that's more rooted in the present. If you've been in a classroom, probably, at least I'm going to say in Massachusetts, I don't know whether this has taken the world by storm, though I know it's been on the cover of Newsweek and all sorts of magazines, but the evidence on the efficacy of mindfulness combined with traditional classroom management strategies.
Yeah, so typically when I see these types of articles, I'm like wholly skeptical.
Yes.
And I don't want to be, but I'm like, come on,
I have to remember that like meditation is something that one can do, and there are benefits,
right.
and it has been researched, and it is useful, and just taking a moment to breathe when you're getting upset or when you're thinking about something, does have a physiological change. Right. So if I think about it that way, it's all good. But when I think about it as, hey everybody, I'm hippy dippy Miss Flu Flam in second grade, and we're doing mindfulness, I just want to punch someone so bad. I just hate that stuff. It just feels like the biggest fad, not because it's not going to work, but because it's going to be one of those things that everyone does mindfulness and they don't know why it would work or how to use it. They just do it. Yeah. And then when there's still a bad kid in my class, I don't want to do this anymore. And then 2 years from now, we're like, remember mindfulness? Remember how dumb that was? Right. And it was just nobody.
That's exactly how I feel about it too. And so in the past, I have in my history engaged in some sort of yogi activities. They prescribe you should do some meditation in the morning. You should slow down and you should be thinking about your day and be in the present. And I'm all for that. And so this is a funny little mindfulness activity that happened to me yesterday. It was in the morning and I was rushing around. I was trying to make breakfast and I've been trying to eat healthier. So I was putting an egg in the microwave to scramble it. And I put the bowl next to the garbage can. So I would just crack the egg in the bowl and then, throw away the shell. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I'm going very quickly. And then I crack the egg and crack the egg into the garbage can. And then I'm like, oh man, I really need to stop and be really present in my day right now because I'm just forgetting things and I'm doing things all over the place. And while I'm thinking about being mindful, I do it again. I crack the egg into the trash can. So I thought that was pretty hilarious when I was looking at this article and I was like, oh yeah, I was thinking about mindfulness while trying to do something else, not being present in the moment, and ruin 2 eggs.
That's pretty funny.
Into the garbage. Yeah. Third one I got, though. Third one chart.
Nice.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when I saw this, I was like, ooh, I want to read this because I like how they're trying to incorporate some evidence-based practice here with the classroom management and using, the fad of mindfulness. But let's
not call it a fad.
Okay, it's not a fad.
You know what used to be called a fad? That you would not think it was a fad now? Possibly,
Wink,
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the video games were a fad as far as anyone was concerned in the 80s. True. And now everyone plays video games.
That's true. So mindfulness is not a fad necessarily. You're right. But it's...
Pokemon was a fad. That game you can still buy that game. Remember Pokemon Go? That was last year. It was huge.
It was so last year.
It reminds me of that. Last year.
But that game came out in I was in high school when that game originally came out, so...
Yeah, it's true. There has been
game?
Pokemon?
Oh.
There's been a lot of research in other areas on mindfulness and its effectiveness, but not necessarily in behavior analysis. But it's becoming an increasing topic.
Yeah, and
of research.
Diana, you actually wanted to see if maybe we could put something specifically about mindfulness together at some point for a future episode.
Yeah, I couldn't find enough research.
At one point, I had actually emailed a researcher. He was at Brown University, somewhere else now, who had done a lot of mindfulness research, and he did send me a whole bunch of stuff, but I can't remember if I actually saved it to a computer that I still have access to or not. But if I did, I'm going to try to find those for a future episode.
Yeah. So I like the idea of this. So let me delve in to tell you all the things I love about the article and all the things that I would love to see more of.
Okay.
So there was an entire third grade classroom that participated. So this is a little bit confusing to me, only because in the beginning of the article they say there's 21 third grade students that participated in the procedures, but they only talk about the results for 6 targeted students.
Yeah.
So I'm unclear if the whole classroom actually participated and received reinforcers based on appropriate responding, or if it was the whole class engaged in the like mindfulness activities, but they really targeted those 6 students. So I'm a little unclear with the procedure. So if I was going to ask another teacher to replicate it, I am unsure in that respect. Is it an interdependent group contingency?
Right.
Meaning, does the whole class need to engage in certain responses in order for a reinforcer to be delivered? Or is it student-specific? Independent group contingency. So we'll just pop in those BACB buzzwords for you gals and guys studying for the exam. But yeah, so that part I was a little unclear about. So that might be a little, if you were going to replicate this, that would be something you'd want to make sure that you did. You clarify that. But yeah, so it happened at a school located in the Midwest. It's important to note. And it was in one classroom, and the class contained a teacher desk and a smart board. And the smart board was important because that is where they signaled the transition, the timer, the countdown timer. So they use that as a discriminative stimulus for these certain classroom management techniques. Yeah, so they identified some student behaviors of concern, and then the researchers actually wrote the operational definitions and how they were going to measure it. So the classroom teachers didn't have to do that. And they collected IOA. And hilariously, they only collected IOA for 6%.
I know.
Yeah, it was bad.
I knew you would be all worked up
I was
about
like,
that.
What? Why even?
They pointed it out.
They did.
They pointed it out.
It is hard to collect IOA in a natural setting, right? I understand that. You can't really necessarily take videotape sessions because of, you have to make sure that all of the confidentiality of your students are protective. But if you can take IOA for 6%, you might want to try a little bit harder. But that's okay, because the IOA they did have was high, but it does leave me a tiny bit skeptical.
It would have been nice to have a little more.
Right, yeah. But I understand. I get it. It's hard to do like naturalistic research.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, number one way they could probably do it, and it would be an extension to what they talked about, was teach the teachers to run the mindfulness sessions so that they could, they as the researchers could just focus on the data, and they could have multiple researchers in there.
Extension.
Boom. Look at that. What?
And real life application. I've been singing a lot today.
I feel like the teachers could have done this procedure
teachers
too.
could
I was a
definitely
little
have
surprised
done
that
this,
they didn't just say, let's just get the teachers involved.
It was probably somebody's thesis. But yeah, so they use a delayed multiple baseline design across settings. And so what is exactly a delayed multiple baseline design?
Is it different than a non-concurrent multiple baseline design?
I don't think so.
I was unfamiliar with that term.
Right. So this is something that I had to look up. I think it is a non-concurrent multiple baseline design.
That's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like. That's what it sounds like.
If it looks like a non-concurrent baseline design,
and it
sounds like a non-concurrent baseline design.
And it tastes like a non-concurrent.
And so it was across settings, aka teachers.
Right,
so
but settings is actually teachers.
Right, so it should have just been across teachers, which is okay too. The classroom teacher and the specialist teacher, which makes sense.
They just didn't know what else to term it.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's not across stimuli.
No.
I think teacher is part of setting. I guess that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Right, because the teacher's going to be the descriptive stimulus for what is learned in the classroom, right? So if it's like an art teacher.
But she was in the art, whoever the specialist teacher was in the classroom itself. So
yeah, so she set the occasion for whatever they were doing. So it's the same setting, right? Because it's the classroom, but the teacher set the occasion for whatever was going to happen. So I get that, but
it's just a weird term.
It was a weird term. It was like, oh, look, now you're a setting. One thing I like too is they had multiple conditions across the delayed multiple baseline across settings. So they had the baseline condition, which is just do what you do normally. Then they had the classroom management techniques. Then they had the classroom management techniques plus mindfulness. And when that was ineffective, they added a self-monitoring part for 2 participants.
Right.
One thing I would have loved to see a little bit differently, maybe if we had more time, is to see the conditions alternated. So you did see the classroom management techniques alone always first, and then the classroom management techniques plus mindfulness second. So you don't necessarily know if it was the mindfulness for that one additional student or just practice effects for that classroom management technique, because even though we haven't gone there, spoiler alert, for most of the students, the classroom management techniques that were taught to the teachers were effective at increasing on-task behaviors, and furthermore, increase on-task behaviors for one of the participants when mindfulness techniques were in play. But it's unclear if it was just mindfulness or it was because of repeated practice or repeated practice of the classroom management. So what I think would be cooler as an extension is if you did an alternating treatment throughout the multiple baseline. So for one participant, maybe they do mindfulness only, then they do classroom management, then they do the both together, and then the next one you do classroom management, mindfulness, classroom management, and so mix it all up.
Yeah, I agree.
To kind of tease out what component was actually effective. Because if it is that mindfulness component, I'd like to know why and how I can then use that in my classroom. Or is it extraneous because the classroom management techniques are the most effective? So,
speaking of components, Jackie, would you mind going through the classroom management techniques and the mindfulness techniques that were used?
Oh, I would. Yeah. So with the classroom behavior management treatment package, they use behavioral skills training. High five for them. I love behavioral skills training to teach these different classroom management techniques. So the first one was a transition timer. So they had that visual countdown timer that they placed on the smartboard during activity transitions. They taught teachers how to ignore inappropriate student behavior. They also implemented a reinforcer incentive system. Then they did the clapping.
Yeah, they
nice.
did the clapping.
Yep,
Nice.
So they did the clapping to gain student attention. So they had gaining student attention, the visual countdown, ignoring inappropriate student behavior, and they implemented a reinforcer incentive system. So that's all of the different techniques that they taught the teachers.
The incentive system looked a lot like one of the systems we were talking about in the Timeout Ribbon. It was the color chart.
Yep, it was a color chart, yeah.
So all of these seem like really good strategies.
The one thing I would have loved to see a little bit more is a little more in depth of, how long did it take to teach each of these different classroom management techniques? What was their mastery criterion? How far did they deviate from, this schedule? We don't necessarily have a procedural integrity checklist as an appendix, but it would have been really cool if we did. I think that would have helped with the replication process.
Yeah. And it goes back to where you're concerned, Jackie, of, for that one kid that the classroom management techniques didn't work quite as well as classroom behavior plus mindfulness. Was it a factor of, they got better at the classroom behavior management system with that one kid at just the right time? There's that piece of coincidence that could have gone on in the system.
And in one point here, they say teachers were trained to reframe comments with a positive affect through modeling and rehearsal with the researcher during class time. So what did that look like? Were kids present? How did the kids feel, the third grade teachers, with this experimenter being like, no, Mrs. Cardinal, you want to say it this way? So I was just, I think a little more detail would have been helpful because it's so interesting, right? And they did a bunch in here. Just the teaching the classroom behavior management techniques alone could in and of itself been like an entire year project, right? So then they said that at the end of the month, students could access a reinforcer if they had maintained a positive color for a set number of days. I'd like to know what that set number is.
I'd like to know what color it was.
Right? I'd like to know if it was per student or per group.
I'd like to know if it was pajama party, pizza party, or a stuffed animal party.
Yeah. So a little bit more information in that, I think, would have been unhelpful, only because if I'm going to replicate this, I would think that I would do it as a group contingency. But is that what they did? Am I going to see the same effects? I'm not sure. And at the end of the month, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Did they ever reach that contingency before adding in the other components?
Who knows? Yeah. So even within
consecutive days, was it a reset component?
Right. Yeah. So there's a bunch there that we could, delve into. So I think it would be nice to kind of have a follow up on what happened there. But then, they showed the teachers these mindfulness exercises derived from Wilson and Dixon in 2010. And they seem kind of fun. It's like 10 minutes of mindfulness and 5 minutes of reflection, which I would love to see third graders engage in.
That's a long time.
Oh, right?
Reflect? Like what?
No, it's a long time to
just
breathe.
Like staring into space.
Yeah, I think they're
the breathing part,
the
reflection part. Okay,
they're
is that
talking,
again? I had no idea what the reflection was.
I
wasn't sure if it was self-reflection. If they were, how did you feel? You know, Billy, tell me what you felt in that. Susie, tell me.
It seemed like they were sharing their experiences with the class for that 5 minutes. So what happened during this mindfulness?
Okay.
So I think that's what happened. It was more of like a question and answer, share 5 minutes. But seeing that's still a long time, and if it's a whole classroom, does everyone get to talk? Does one person get to talk? Are you taking data on who's talking, who's not talking?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some stuff that could happen there. So the first thing is they did the quiet game. Man, have I used this on my cousins so many times. Guys, let's play the quiet game. Where everyone puts their heads down and everyone just gets praised for being quiet for 10 minutes. Do you ever do this?
Yeah, they didn't call that mindfulness when I was in school. They just said, put your head down on your desk. Let's think.
And then you have to think about, okay, what happened during that 10 minutes you were quiet? So that's what they talked about in the reflection.
How many kids said, I was bored?
Right. Then they had deep breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Deep breathing, I'm surprised that nobody passed out because deep breathing for 10 minutes is a lot, right? So it's you're smelling a flower and then blowing out a candle. So if you're like really deep breathing for 10 minutes, you could get super lightheaded. Yeah. So they don't say anything about any like indirect effects, but I'm wondering, and 10 minutes of deep breathing is a long time.
Yeah.
That's like, if you think about a yoga, like an entire yoga workout, that's 50 minutes. That's like 1/5 of a yoga workout. But then they have...
That's my least favorite part of yoga.
Yeah, me too.
Breathing.
But that's the one you're supposed to... That's the core of meditation.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Yeah, apparently
that's
I'm
an
no good at
important
that.
part.
The next two the next three I actually love. Structured breathing, so they had a metronome that changed tempo, and then you had to breathe along to that. I think that's a little easier than the deep breathing.
That seems much more fun, too.
Yeah, that seems much more fun. So they did that for 10 minutes and then talked about it for 5. And then they had to remain at their desk, close their eyes, and attend to their senses for 10 minutes. So this was the present moment awareness. So how's your mouth feeling? And then you think about it and you talk about it.
My mouth feels bored.
My mouth is stupid. And then my most favorite, mindful eating.
It just sounds so...
All kids love this one.
Oh, I don't like it at all. It's like, listen to the rapper. Now,
That's why, because you imagine making that sound.
Eating.
That sound.
Hold on, everybody.
Stop
Let me mindfully eat.
No, it's true, though, right? So I bet the kids love this part. And
you get a Starburst.
You get a Starburst.
Oh,
or
yeah,
Hershey
the
Kiss.
gooeyest.
Right?
Stop it.
For me, though, this one seemed a little out of place. Like the mindful eating seemed a little out of place only because it's unlikely in a classroom setting you're going to be eating things, right?
It leads to obesity, Jackie. It's not allowed.
No, but you know what I mean? Like you're usually like doing math problems or you're not really mindfully eating. That just seemed a little out of place with like a strategy that you would use if you were engaging in off-task behavior. Like would you be like, I need to get out of Hershey Kiss now, and I need to stare at it, and then I need to open it.
It's the process.
I understand.
Yeah, right?
But
it's
I'm
the whole
thinking,
idea of you just slow down.
Sure, I get it. But I'm also thinking practically.
Focus on my mouth movements.
I'm also thinking practically the other few, if a situation gets tense, okay, let's play the quiet game, everyone. Okay,
let's all get out some food.
Right? The mindful eating seems less of a strategy for deceleration in the moment than the other few. And then the final is mindful movement. So the students were asked to stand behind their desks. They did different stretches and focused on their breathing.
You already went through the results a little bit, Jackie. You had, of the 6, I guess, target students, 4 did well with classroom behavior management systems. Then they added mindfulness, and 5 did well. But then after they did mindfulness, there were those 2 kids who did worse.
Yeah, they did worse.
they kind of went off a cliff after mindfulness.
Like, I don't want to think about things. Don't put me in the present. One thing
it's unclear what happened.
Steven he just went off a cliff. He did worse than baseline with.
Yeah, he did unfortunately worse. The one thing I do want to mention though is it doesn't actually tell you what mindfulness exercise they did. Mm-hmm. So it must have been like a grab bag of like I'm gonna pick one a day.
They only did each of them 2 to 3 times.
The whole
study. Yeah.
So that seemed to me a little bit confusing, only because if I'm going to replicate this and teach a teacher, do I run through all of these exercises? I hope not. That's all day. No. Or do I like counterbalance them? What day is going to be better for doing what exercise? So I think a little more clarity, or even some more research on like what exercise would be best for what mindfulness, strategy you're using. But yeah, let's talk about Stephen here. Stephen and William get their own page. During baseline, unfortunately for most of these kids too, we do see a little bit of a ceiling effect, because across all of the kids you do see 100% of on-task behavior in baseline. Not consistently, but it's there. Mm-hmm. So that, although great, clinically, for a research design, you're like, ugh, I would not love to see that. But for Stephen, in his baseline with his classroom teacher, it was, around 50 to 100%, with a increasing trend at the end of baseline. So I may would have wanted to run that out a little bit. I know, I'm like, come on. And it also an increasing trend with the specials teacher. So in both situations, even though when you do see that non-concurrent multiple baseline here, it was unfortunate that for both Stephen's baseline sessions, you do see that increasing trend. So I find it a little harder to look at what happens next. But you do see it, a jump when you're looking at that classroom behavior management technique to around 80%. Mm-hmm.
Maybe the delayed multiple baseline means that they just weren't taking baseline that whole time. It's like they only started taking baseline way after.
Right. Yeah, that could be possibly too.
So it could be that the data points are happening on concurrent days, but they just didn't start the second setting
for a long time. That actually makes a lot more sense.
Whatever that looks like, 30 days.
Yeah. But, we don't see a lot of change from baseline to classroom behavior management. And then at the end of classroom behavior management, you see a very low data point. Mm-hmm. I would have loved to see that run out a little bit more to see what was going on, because then when you add in the mindfulness, you see worsening behavior. Yeah. But self-monitoring, so what they did is they had a little checklist so that he could self-monitor appropriate behaviors, and that increased behavior to similar levels to baseline, unfortunately.
Yeah, and classroom behavior, not the end of classroom behavior management, but the classroom behavior management overall results.
There, I'm not really sure what's going on. I can say that for Stephen, we don't know, right?
Mindfulness was not effective.
Mindfulness was not effective, right?
Potentially worsened the situation.
Yeah. We don't know why. Just being asked to sit for 10 minutes and think about. That's all he could do for the day.
Right.
Like, done.
He's done.
Yeah.
And we do see similar effects for William as well when his classroom teacher, between baseline, if I had not looked up to see what the conditions were, it would be really hard for me to tell, because the level across all of them, the classroom behavior management plus mindfulness, as well as the follow-up, is that?
The self-monitoring.
The self-monitoring.
Well, that seems more consistently. But again, is it a practice effect?
Right, and it's still the same level. Yeah. So I can't, if I'm drawing my imaginary line, it's probably going right through all of those data points. So for William and Stephen, I'm not sure we can say anything. Mm-hmm. Even though you do see slightly clinically better effects with self-monitoring, I'm not sure it's due to the self-monitoring. Mm. It could be due to something else.
We don't know.
We don't know. So, but for all of the other students, when you're looking at Sophie and Beth, Karen and Joseph, they do have high rates of on-task behavior in baseline. So that could represent that ceiling effect, because they couldn't go higher than that. So although they had some low data points, all of them had at least a 90% or above during baseline, which is pretty darn good. Mm-hmm. So interesting.
Maybe they could have just said, "Hey, kids, shape up."
Right? Yeah.
Would have been their treatment.
You don't have to breathe a bunch.
We don't know.
Yeah. So they also looked at standard mean difference, which I think is interesting, which is what prompted them, to state that mindfulness may have been slightly more effective, because when you're looking at that bar graph, the classroom behavior management plus mindfulness does have a higher mean difference for all of the participants. But again, when you visually analyze the data on individual days, I don't see much of a difference. Yeah. So I think it's good. I think it's a good start, to start deconstructing what's going to help work with typically developing kids and maybe kids, on the spectrum or diagnosed with some sort of disability to, start tacting internal events.
Right.
Something we can, start thinking about. We all have had that moment where something may evoke some emotional responding, and how we handle that emotional responding, how we behave, could be impacted by learning these different, ways to alleviate those types of responding.
Yeah. I mean, in this study, they conducted these as a classroom.
Right.
We don't know as much about whether they were teaching the kids to implement the same strategies on their own.
Right.
Outside of the guided exercises in the class. So that might be a nice extension of this work, too.
Yeah. So it's promising.
Yeah.
Right? You always have to start somewhere.
I just want Starburst, I think. I think that's, I keep going back to the Starburst. And the Hershey Kiss, right? Or was it a Tootsie Roll?
It was a Hershey Kiss.
Yeah. I want to be part of the study so I get extra candy.
I don't want to mindfully eat a Hershey Kiss. It's going to melt all over the place in 10 minutes.
You know what's great is if you eat a Hershey Kiss, but you just keep it in your mouth and then you drink coffee and it like melts a little bit at a time.
You know what's also really good? If you just sit down outside on a hot day with your bag of Hershey Kisses and then you just eat them all. Mindfully, all of them. But disposing.
Don't mind me. I'm mindfully eating my Hershey Kisses.
Disposing them all in the trash can. So that
you gotta eat those fast too, because they're gonna melt.
Yep.
But that's the best part, is having sticky, chocolatey fingers.
Ugh.
Nobody wants to share then.
No, thank you.
But yeah, so
Timeout Ribbon.
I thought this was a fun article to kind of discuss.
Well, a lot more to look at with mindfulness, and I think one of the things I'm worried about with mindfulness is that it is a potentially useful classroom management tool, but will there be enough research completed in enough time to show that there isn't an effect to make it worth the while of teachers to continue using it? Or will it be one of those systems that people use and they stop and they never really think critically enough about, or there's just not enough research published about to say yay or nay, this should be a part of our bag of tricks, it should not be. Or sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Right.
This gets us a little closer there, but not quite. Not quite there. Keep going, though.
Yeah,
It's good to see people working on this in the behavior analytic field, because it definitely is not an area that I would have expected to see anything on mindfulness.
Right. I love it.
All right. Well,
we won't even talk about the name.
No,
it's okay. We're not there. Yeah. We have to understand why it's occurring before we can deconstruct the name of mindfulness.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Well, we're running kind of long, so why don't we just take a really, really quick... I want to take the bullet train.
We're not even stopping. We're just putting our hands out.
We're going to stop real quick for a bathroom break here in Insemination Station, then we're back on. We've got two strategies for classroom management. We talked about a couple other ones, but the main ones were the Timeout Ribbon and using mindfulness in addition to general classroom management systems.
Well, I do like that we chose this study because it, for those listeners out there who might be looking for management strategies, it does review other classroom management strategies briefly that have been shown to be effective as well. So you get kind of a whole package deal there.
But did anything in the articles make you rethink, I would recommend this as part of a treatment package, or probably stick with the good old standbys, and maybe if there were a function-based treatment that you thought timeout would be helpful, you might suggest the Timeout Ribbon or a modification. Maybe you'd say, hey, mindfulness is worth training people to engage in.
I think mindfulness as a whole, when I'm looking at this, I would love to, tear down the procedures, make them more specific, more objective, objective. I'm like, I was going to say objectionable, but that's not the word I'm thinking.
You don't want to make them less objectionable.
Yeah, so I want to make them more objective.
No more mindful eating.
Yeah, and really like tease out what is going on there. So that's something that I've been pondering that my incoming master students may have to do a thesis on, because I'll be like, hey guys, you have this or nothing. Just kidding, we don't do that. But I kind of want to for this idea. I bet I could spin it.
Mindfulness right now to me is one of those, like when we talked about talking to non-behavior analysts, that someone brings up and you're like, there's nothing saying it's bad, and I've heard some maybe positive things, so I'm not going to say anything at all. Remember, I don't think it'll hurt.
Our decision tree.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
And I would like to know yay or nay. I should be saying, that's a great idea. Or, no, you can't. No. But we don't know. So it's sort of just, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
We don't know. We need more research. Get out there, behavior analysts, promising behavior analysts, and do your research.
Dinah, any thoughts from your readings of these two articles?
It seems to me that some of the most important things you can do is set out clear contingencies at the beginning with your classroom and provide a lot of reinforcement for appropriate behavior and not provide a lot of attention for inappropriate behavior. And if you get that set up right away at the beginning of your school year, then you're likely to be able to tackle the individual problems that are going to arise with particular students who do have a hard time more readily, because they'll clearly be the ones who need some additional systems in place.
I'm more and more of the mindset that, exactly like you said, it's setting up systems, setting up class-wide systems, setting up a tone for your entire body of students to follow, rather than just waiting for there to be a problem and then how many individual behavior plans do I want to run as the classroom teacher? Because the answer is 2 max.
Right.
If you're running 3 or 4, you have done a bad job somewhere, and you need to rethink how you're spending your time.
Or you're working in a classroom that's perhaps designed to handle.
Oh yeah, okay. So if I'm not working in a general education
students,
classroom,
and then you hopefully have help there to work with.
But if you're in a general education classroom setting, I should say, and you've got like 4 or 5 individual behavior plans going, something's not working, or hopefully you are working with multiple other teachers, and the students are there for inclusion times or something along those lines. Although I stand by, don't have that many systems in your classroom unless you are a very specialized classroom, or you are destined to fail.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
I think we learned a lot.
We all learned a lot today.
And I see Rebecca, and I see...
Oh, we haven't brought that one up in a long time.
I know.
Did you know there's a new Anne of Green Gables? Speaking of...
I've watched it.
Oh, is it any good?
I would like to say that I appreciated the grittiness of the first couple of episodes that followed along with the original storyline. However, when they deviated from the storyline, I get angry, and so I finished it, but it deviates quite far from the storyline of the book, and so then I was like, this is not right. No, this did not happen. And remember, I can probably recite the entire book and the entire CBC version of the movie, the old movie, the better movie with Megan Fox. But the characters are endearing. Gilbert's, he's endearing. And she does a good job. But it's not magical. It's more like, I wouldn't show like my young daughter that. I wouldn't be like, let's watch this together. Because
it's not like, canon.
What?
It's not canon.
No. It's got, images of abuse and... Which would make sense because she's an orphan, right? But she was in an orphanage, and she worked as like a maid, so it makes sense. But it just wasn't.
I miss Colleen Dewhurst.
Yeah. There wasn't any Colleen Dewhurst.
Speaking of which, before we go, we need to have our second secret code word for you CE searchers out there, and the second secret code word is teacup. 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 Like the thing that you done put some tea in. It's a cup for tea. Teacup. And that's that. I keep thinking someone else is going to end the show, but I guess that's my job.
Nope.
So thanks.
I'll just sit here till eternity.
Well, thank you all so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. As we mentioned before, we are a podcast that you can listen to for continuing education credits, you BCBAs and BCABAs out there. If you are interested in following along with our exploits, you could follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, where we try to have a new post about something related to the field every single day. You can also email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. You can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your fine podcasts. We'll be back next week with an all-new preview episode where we'll be telling you what our next hot topic is. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye now.